All right, Crim 1, here we go, wrapping up the portion on the courts. That would be Chapter 10, which is the sentencing portion. So, let's see. Cruel and unusual punishment. This is an issue that is addressed in the 8th Amendment. And cruel and unusual punishment and what it actually stands for is defined as has changed over time, but obviously, as you can read here, a sentence or conditions of confinement that within the time period of sentencing or confinement go beyond what is acceptable to society. So clearly things in society are different now in this year as opposed to in, the early 1900s. People might have been whipped or beaten or branded or who knows what kind of horrible things were done to people back then. Now, our society has kind of a general standard of what is cruel and unusual and what is not. Again, that's something that does change over time. I'm going to give you an example of a case where he was a prisoner, an inmate in Delaware was filing a lawsuit against the Department of Corrections in Delaware because the inmate was being forced to eat something called prison loaf. And what prison loaf is basically everything that the inmate is going to eat for the day. And there are certain, nutrients, vitamins, minerals, carbs, all the above. There's a certain requirement that inmates must be given on a daily basis. So his was all ground up in a blender, poured into a loaf pan, and baked and served to him like that. And he indicated that was cruel and unusual punishment, which might seem, and he had to eat this for probably 6 weeks straight. So what happened is that was being used as a form of punishment for behavior that he was continuously participating in while in prison. And that behavior was something called gassing. He was gassing the correctional officers. What gassing is generally throwing bodily fluids on people or feces. So feces, semen, urine, blood, snot, whatever. Every time they came to feed him before the prison loaf, he was gassing them. So that was their way of dealing with the gassing. So was that cruel and unusual punishment? What do you think? He filed a lawsuit and the court found, I'm wondering what you're thinking right now. Do you think that they agreed with him? They did not. The court said that was not cruel and unusual punishment. Stop throwing poop at people and you won't have to eat prison loaf. So anyways, there's different variations of what could and could not be cruel and unusual. Habeas corpus is really just an order for a court, or not the court, but any agency that is holding a person in custody to show proof that there is a reason that the individual is being held in custody. This is kind of hard to explain, but example, Guantanamo Bay. So right after 9/11, a lot of suspected terrorists were scooped up by our government, our soldiers, and they were taken to Guantanamo Bay, where they were held for an indefinite period of time. They did not have court hearings. There was no probable cause. There was nothing that said why they were being held. And because they were in Guantanamo Bay, which is off the coast of Cuba, it was basically seen more or less as we didn't have to follow the rules that took place within the United States when dealing with these inmates, with these suspected terrorists. Well, we had a change of president, and the president at the time said that it's unconstitutional for us to hold these suspected terrorists without habeas corpus, without whoever is holding them showing probable cause, a reason to actually hold them. So a bunch of inmates, suspected terrorists, where we didn't really have any evidence. They were just suspected terrorists. We thought they were terrorists, but maybe we didn't have a case against them yet, and we were just holding them for random long periods of time. So that president ordered that they should all have the right to habeas corpus, and because of that, a significant number of them were released. Were they terrorists? Some of them were. Did they commit crimes after that? Some of them did. But this is just part of our country, fortunately or unfortunately, however you see that. But habeas corpus is basically whatever the agency is that's holding a person must show proof that they need to be held. Excuse me. Pre-sentence investigation. This is also part of sentencing. Probation officers write these reports. So having worked with probation as a probation officer, I wrote quite a few of these reports. These are reports that take into account the suspect's history. We're talking employment history, educational history, health, mental health, drugs, alcohol, gangs, prior record, family relationships, all that kind of stuff. We get as much information together as, and including information about the crime for which they were just convicted. They write a very long report sometimes, and in that report, actually at the end of the report, they make a recommendation for sentencing purposes. So pre-sentence investigation reports are written on felony, adult felony cases, and they offer, that you also can have a victim impact statement. Yeah, I forgot about that part. So the victim is also, there are attempts to make contact with the victim as well. And the recommendation at the end is for sentencing. And the judge could follow the recommendation or not. It's up to him or her. Goals and models for sentencing. Okay. Retribution. Retribution I would define as an eye for an eye or revenge. So this would be one of the goals or models for sentencing. Deterrence, either specific or general. Deterrence is a hard one for me to describe as well, so I like to give an example. Let's say I went to a party and I was there for 1 hour and I had 8 shots of Don Julio. And an hour later I decided, I better go home, and I start walking out to my car with my keys and I'm getting ready to drive, and as soon as I sit down and put my keys in or turn the car on, I suddenly remember what it was like the last time I got a DUI. I did not really get a DUI. This is a story. The last time I got a DUI, and how horrible it was, and how much time and money I spent trying to kind of dig my way out of the DUI, how embarrassing it was, how awful it was that I had to take Ubers to work because I lost my license. And after thinking about all that stuff, I was deterred from committing a crime. Okay, specific. General, we'd say the same scenario. I had all those shots, I got in my car, I'm getting ready to start the car, and then I look over at my husband and I say, oh God, I remember when he got that DUI, that was awful. He also did not get a DUI, by the way, side note. I learned my lesson. I made my decision to not drink and drive based on something I saw happen to someone else. General. I hope that makes sense. Incapacitation. That is when a person is physically detained or unable to commit crime because they are in custody. Rehabilitation. I think we all know this one. This is when corrections departments work on fixing the problem that caused the criminal behavior. And then restitution. This is paying the victim back or making the victim whole again. So that is those. Determinate sentencing versus indeterminate sentencing. Determinate sentencing, there's a specific set time that a person will be in custody. Let's say they were convicted of a vehicle theft, and the maximum period of confinement for that offense is 3 years. That offender under determinate sentencing will absolutely positively not be in custody beyond 3 years. Then we go to indeterminate sentencing. Indeterminate sentencing is a range of sentencing options, and really it's easiest for me to describe it like 25 to life. We don't know when the end of that sentence will be. it's undetermined or indeterminate. But we do know that that person will be in custody for at least 25 years and maybe their whole life, depending on their behavior in prison. So hopefully that makes sense. There is a lot of discretion in sentencing. However, there are also some guidelines in sentencing. You're probably familiar with 3 strikes. It used to be that you would commit 2 serious violent felonies, and then the 3rd crime just had to be any kind of felony. And if you had your 3rd strike, you were going to be in custody for 25 to life. This has changed somewhat. It is kind of ongoing changes that are taking place to the 3 strikes law because our prison population is so overcrowded. So, truth in sentencing laws. These are laws that are used in federal courts, where inmates are sentenced and they will serve 80 to 85% of the time that they are sentenced to in custody. So if I were in federal court and I were convicted of a 10-year felony, I'm going to do probably about 8.5 years in custody. If I'm sentenced to the same thing 10 years in California, into our prison system, it's very likely I would get out in about 1/3 of the time. So I would probably get out in about 3.5 years. So truth in sentencing laws just means that offenders are going to stay in custody significantly longer. They're not going to be eligible for early releases. Mandatory minimum sentencing. There are certain crimes for which there is a mandatory sentence imposed that must be imposed by the judge. So the judge doesn't have discretion. There are not that many of these particular types of offenses. But when someone is convicted of one of those crimes, then the judge has no discretion and has to sentence them to whatever is provided for in that law. What are the consequences of all 3 of these things? 3 strikes, truth in sentencing laws, and mandatory minimum sentences, overflowing prisons, and we also have elderly inmates in prison. And there are a decent number of elderly inmates in our prisons. Then we have consecutive versus concurrent sentences. Let's imagine I was convicted of 10 separate misdemeanor counts of vandalism. And each one of those charges carries with it a maximum period of confinement of 1 year. And I'm convicted of all of them. If I were sentenced consecutively, I would serve 1 year after the other year, after the other year, after the other year, and so on for the 10 years. Okay? So consecutive, if you're sentencing someone consecutively, that means they're serving their crimes each separately, one after the other. Concurrent is a lot more common, first and foremost, but concurrent sentences are when an offender, again, use that same example. I had 10 1-year misdemeanor felonies, and I served 1 year total for all of them. They were all served at the same time, so I only did 1 year in custody. I hope that makes sense. Capital punishment, this is the death penalty. The death penalty can only be imposed when a murder has taken place. It is not legal in all states. It is legal in some, and others not. California right now, it is not legal. I shouldn't say that. There's a governor-imposed moratorium right now. So capital punishment, only murder, only murder. This is kind of just some stats, some numbers on the death penalty. You can see that huge spike there right around 2000, and that was after the crack era. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it was such a crazy time in our country. Then this shows some states with and without the death penalty and those with governor-imposed moratoriums. And you'll see California is one of those. Our governor does not believe in the death penalty, so as long as Governor Newsom is our governor, we will not have the death penalty in California. So you see, what I think is very interesting is how many of those states are in the South versus states in the North. It's definitely a different point of view in North versus South. Not all, but you see a big chunk there in the South. Texas, Louisiana, and Florida, definitely, they put a lot of people to death every year. And there are many different means of execution. It could be lethal injection, it can be gas chamber, it can be electric chair, it can be firing squad, hanging. In some states, allow for this stuff. But most people are put to death by way of lethal injection. What are the issues with the death penalty? There are about 1 million issues with the death penalty. Whether you're for it or against it, or you believe in it or you don't, we are one of the only civilized countries where the death penalty is still imposed. Yeah. So, what other kind of issues can there be? Has anyone ever been put to death before that was later found not guilty? Yeah, that has happened. So there are lots of issues with the death penalty, moral issues, legal issues, you name it. So, yeah, maybe we'll do a death penalty discussion question soon. So, that's it.